Welcome to the show both feared and revered by man and beast, the Helios blog. Today, Jordan Peterson and Piers Morgan, fierce debate. This should be good.
The reason she's alone is because she's difficult.
Women are not accepting the bare minimum.
Women fuck men they respect.
All the women who say things like, I'm strong, independent, I don't need no man, like, y'all impress me.
Women just gaslight each other and say what they want to hear.
The central story of the West is that each person is to take up their cross and carry it uphill, and that that's a divine calling, and that the fate of the world in some sense depends on that. And we're going to see, Pierce, in the next 30 years, we're going to see, and it might be a lot faster than that, just exactly how true that is, as the evidence for the world disrupting consequences of our hypothetically trivial errors start to become increasingly manifest, increasingly and rapidly manifest. Lay out the underlying archetypal structure of reality, the endless battle between good and evil. And the most profound commentators on such battle have always concluded that the fundamental line is drawn in the human soul. And if you want to get the demons of the world under control, you better start with the demons in your own skull. And if you don't think that's enough to keep you busy, that just means you haven't looked inside with enough, courage and perspicacity. There's plenty of disorder in your own soul.
He's right. And again, there is something to be said about the woke crap. And by that I mean deleting your religion in your country for a different woke ideology that just encourages division probably won't help when the boogeyman is at the door.
To occupy yourself with for the rest of your life. And this is something, we're either going to learn this voluntarily, consciously, and wisely, or we're going to be beat to death by our own stupidity. And that's going to happen quickly in many, many ways. You can see it unfolding. Well, you can see it unfolding around us now.
So 2 questions on the US election. Can Donald Trump win? And would it be a good thing for America and the world if he does win?
Well, I think he can win, assuming that he'll be put on the ballot, as far as
Indeed.
I've been able to tell. And God only knows how reliable the polls are, and generally not very, because the questions are usually biased unconscionably. He's certainly popular enough to win. I don't see another candidate emerging on the Republican side at the moment who poses a threat. There are some interesting people running, that's for sure. It looks to me like DeSantis is a pretty competent character, and Vivek Ramaswamy is, at minimum, very interesting and bright and quite the disruptive force. On the Democrat side, Dean Phillips, who almost no one knows about, and who the Democrats are doing, everything they can to keep it that way. He's an interesting alternative to Biden. I don't think Kennedy has a chance, although there are some things about him I like. I think Trump could win.
Look at Joe walking. Does it give you the confidence of a person that is not in the throes of dementia? Anyway.
Will that be good? It depends on what he does if he wins. It depends on the manner in which the victory takes place. It depends on whether or not the people on the more conservative side of the spectrum are able to extend a welcoming hand to those who are more on the progressive side. And it certainly depends on whether those on the progressive side are willing to dispense with some of the ideological stupidity that possesses them, that is generating an endless sequence of unnecessary culture war.
I don't think that's going to happen.
The left in particular has become 100% preoccupied with the most pathological possible political narrative, which is essentially a victim-victimizer story. That you can understand every element of social interaction among humans, from marriage upwards to the political, in terms of who's got the power, who's the oppressed. And there's nothing in that but an endless recipe for not only for the most bitter of soul-devouring resentments, but for the application of any form of vengeance imaginable. I can't imagine this something that possesses.
Indeed. I made reference to this already. Didn't I say, literally previous video, that should the force of law break down in the United States, what will happen is not peace between people. No. The people, because of their new indoctrination, their new religion, which is wokeism, will attack the most rich, the most powerful, because that's what they've been indoctrinated to do. The most rich, the most powerful, the most entitled, in their opinion. And it'll be total anarchy.
As the universities as well. There is nothing more toxic than a victimized narrative. And that certainly possesses the radical left in particular to the nth degree. And there's nothing in that but disaster.
Indeed.
So, it's part and parcel of what we've been discussing. There's going to be very rapid change, not least on the electoral front in the upcoming year. And how that goes will depend on how people conduct themselves, and ever more so. So we can pray that we're terrified enough of the potential negative consequences and enticed enough by the potential positive consequences to walk ever more carefully. We'll see. If you have big toys, you better be a big boy. And we don't have big toys, we have giant toys. And they will stomp us into the ground unless we're wise enough to guide them properly.
The fascinating thing about Trump, for example, is I always say to people, I've known him a long time and know him very well. He's got the thinnest skin of any person in public life. He reacts to absolutely everything and goes to DEFCON 1 in a heartbeat. But he also has the thickest skin. He can soak up stuff that would crush any other political figure in history in seconds. This is a guy facing nearly 100 criminal charges, and yet all that's done is actually make him more popular. I mean, we are into completely uncharted territory with Trump as a political figure, aren't we?
No.
Well, I don't think the Democrats could have done a better job of keeping the name of Trump alive if they would have planned to do that. And it's certainly possible that in some ways they did plan to do that, because the scuttlebutt among the political theorists that pass for wise men among the Democrats is that, well, if Trump is the candidate, then Biden can beat him. It's like, well, not necessarily. I wouldn't bet the farm on that, although that's probably already occurred. And
indeed.
Trump is
I wouldn't bet the farm on that.
Canny enough to know that in some real way, all publicity is good publicity. And it's certainly the case that the Democrat persecution of Trump, and I think that's the right term, has kept him alive and has also cast him so perversely in the role of victim that the Democrats themselves are always, what would you say, trumpeting as being allied with. It's an unbelievably demented move on the strategic side.
Indeed.
My sense was if Biden would have taken a careful look at the Abraham Accords, which he certainly should have, because then we wouldn't be in the situation we're in right now in relationship to Israel, let's say. He could have given Trump a medal, clapped him on the back, said, "Good job, mate," and maybe he would have ridden off into the sunset. Now, that would have meant the Democrats would have had to contend with someone like DeSantis, let's say, who's at minimum hyper-competent. And I don't think that was in the cards. So instead, they determined to play idiot political games, not like those aren't well known on the Republican side. And they raised Trump from the dead. And they do that continually. So, I think
there we are.
Personally, and this is just a guess because what do I know, I think that the most likely outcome is that Trump is the next president. That's what it looks like to me. So I think that's unfortunate.
Yeah, I think that could
he's
absolutely
he's so
happen.
divisive, That's the problem. Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting because when I did the Celebrity Apprentice, the first series of that back in 2008, I saw Trump across a boardroom table for 3 hours a night for about 6 weeks. And you get to know somebody pretty well, actually, because a lot of it didn't get aired. If he showed even an ounce of the empathy that he showed to people then, if he showed more of the humor without being vicious, if he showed less of the punching everyone in the face and more of occasionally putting a metaphorical arm around people, I think the perception of Trump would change dramatically. But he seems to think the only way to be a political leader is to be a kind of swaggering, trash-talking, very aggressive person. And I think that's a shame. It's a shame for him, and it's a shame for those like me who see a lot of good in Trump.
Well, again, he's just trying to project a certain image, right? You, as Machiavelli said, you have to pick a side. So that's the side he's chosen to pick.
He was very good to me. When I left America, left CNN and went back to Britain, I can count on one hand the number of American people in the business, if you like, who stayed in touch with me. Trump did. He rang me quite regularly to check how I was doing. Could he help? He didn't need to do that. So he has got these qualities. It's just I don't see much evidence of him as a political leader. He's taken a different path.
Well, I would say part of that is a consequence of the fact that the radical leftists have given it compassion and empathy a bad name. And so because Trump is standing against, especially the radicals, he's being put in a position where he more or less de facto has to stand against that kind of smothering, quasi-maternal, devouring sympathy that's part and parcel of being allied with the victims. And so part of that's an ideological problem. I would also say that I believe that there has been no political figure, certainly in my living memory, with the possible exception of Richard Nixon, who's been vilified more thoroughly and also more falsely than Trump. And I would point to the idiot conclusion of Russian collusion, especially with regards to the Hunter Biden laptop, as evidence in that regard. Trump has no shortage of flaws, let's say, a statement that can be said of all of us. But apart from vicious criticism with regard to those faults, there has been an absolute surfeit of devastating criticism and persecution for faults that are not real. And, it isn't obvious to me how much a person can take without starting to feel continually embattled. I've certainly had to fight against the proclivity to cease turning the other cheek, let's say, with regards to those who regard themselves as my enemies. Because if you're gone after enough, you tend to think that the best defense is a good offense, let's say. And it's very difficult to plot your way forward against those kinds of odds. Now, Trump did go into the White House as an outsider, both on the Republican and the Democrat front, and he has faced no shortage of impediments. And it's a hell of a lot to ask of someone to take all that with good graces. And he's certainly done better than he might have in that regard. He's still in the race, for example. Now, you might say, well, if you want to be president, you better be the guy that has that kind of largeness of spirit. And fair enough. But let him who is without sin cast the first stone, let's say.
Right.
He's an old guy, and he's bombastic. And he's under a lot of pressure. And so, and all the lies that have been generated to blacken his name have made him a worse man, at least in his public-facing image, than he might otherwise have been. And I can't...
So it's actually a really funny point that the argument they're making is that he's become this person because of what the public has made him become. He was forced effectively to become this way. It's actually very interesting, and I've never heard this idea before, right? That he's actually not as bad as he's portrayed in the media. Of course, that makes logical sense because, like, really, nobody's as bad as they're portrayed by people that are trying to portray someone as bad. But anyway.
Can't help but see in that also a kind of nefarious, underhanded plan. If you can't defeat your opponent fair and square on the field of vision, let's say, or compassion, then you can do everything you can to back them into a corner and provoke them into doing something reprehensible so that you can blacken their name. And it's certainly the case that the Democrats have done absolutely everything they possibly could to do that, say, with regard to January 6th, while simultaneously taking no responsibility whatsoever for the widespread rioting that accompanied, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah, I think it's the double standard on a lot of this stuff that enrages a lot of people. If that's your prediction for the American election, which I think is probably right now looking quite likely, what's your prediction for the UK election? You've been quite scathing about Sir Keir Starmer, but the polls show at the moment, certainly, if the election happens in the autumn, it seems likely, that he is heading to some kind of victory. What do you think that would mean for Britain? And do the Conservatives have any chance of stopping that?
I think it'll be catastrophic. I believe that Labour, like the socialist parties in Canada, is absolutely overwhelmed by the diversity, equity, and inclusivity, victimizer narrative types. And that even if Starmer himself has any sense, which I doubt, the probability that his minions will lay waste to the UK it's certain in my estimation. There's so much behind the scene tyrannizing going on in the name of hypothetical utopian progress that it's almost unimaginable. I mean, the CCTVs in the ULEZ zones are a great example of that, and everything that's happened in London under Sadiq Khan, who's like poster boy for ideologically addled globalist utopians. And if the Labour gets in, and I can understand why the citizens of the UK are hungry for a change. If Labour gets in, it's like Venezuela, here we come. I think it'll be...
Venezuela, here we come. Oh, Lordy. Imagine going from global empire 200 years ago to Venezuela, here we come. Oh man, from riches to rags in 200 years. Imagine being so incompetent for so many generations that happens. That's probably never happened.
I think at minimum, the UK will probably manage to overtake Canada as worst performing developed country over the next 4 decades if they're foolish enough to elect a Labour government. And that's quite a
statement.
Opponent to overcome, given the state of our leadership in Canada.
Yeah, it is. What are your thoughts, Jordan, about the two wars still raging, Ukraine and Russia, and of course Israel and its war in Gaza against Hamas?
Well, I think Ukraine is great news for the arms manufacturers and the military-industrial complex, and I think that's really 90% of the issue right there. I mean, it's been in their interest, and I say this without cynicism, by the way, it's been in their interest since the demise of the Cold War to insist upon the positioning of Russia as the dire enemy of the West. I mean, first of all, if you're a military supplier, it's your job to be paranoid and to look for enemies, and there's some utility in that, right? I mean, that's part of being wise as serpents, let's say. But it also means that there's constant pressure from extremely well-heeled individuals, those that run the military-industrial complex, to damn all potential peace accords with faint praise and to constantly agitate on the side of war and preparation thereof. And the war in Ukraine is a bonanza for the military-industrial complex, and that's a complete bloody catastrophe. We had a chance, especially in the 90s, and in the 2000s for that matter, to make a long-standing peace with Russia. Not an easy thing to do, especially in the face of China. And we burned up that opportunity like the fools that we are. And here we are with that. With regards to Israel and Hamas, well, a war occurs when people can't agree, and we certainly can't agree on the facts of the matter at hand with regard to the conflict in Israel. My sense is, most fundamentally, that it's been hyper convenient for the radical Islamists, especially those in Iran, to have Hamas and the Palestinians suffer greatly and continually so that they can be a constant goad in the side of Israel and the US. And so we've stepped right into that as well. What's the solution? Well, I'd be a fool to offer one, wouldn't I? Because there's been a plethora of solutions offered with regards to Israel and the Palestinians over the last 6 decades, and very little progress has been made on that front. And I think the reason for that is that there are incredibly entrenched interests in whose interest it is to prolong and make as bloody as possible this conflict. And so there's no hope for peace under those circumstances. And for the Islamic fundamentalists, so-called Islamic fundamentalists who are fostering the conflict, what's a few 100,000 or million Palestinian lives? Doesn't hurt them if all those innocent people die. So that's a dreadful situation.
Yup, and as you know, we don't condone war here, so it's, not a great situation, let's put it that way, on both fronts. Just, again, we know what the point is. I think I've made the point already before when I was commenting on this, that it's an attempt at USSR 2.0. But what do I know?
If I was in Israel's shoes, I suppose I would likely do much the same as they are doing, with one possible coda, which is that as Israel becomes more successful on the military front, which is highly likely, the swing in popular opinion is likely to increasingly go against them, because it's a lot easier to trumpet moral virtue by siding with the hypothetical victims than it is to celebrate the accomplishment of the conquerors. And so I'm afraid that one likely outcome for Israel is that they win militarily, but lose strategically. However, we'll see. One of the things I'm very happy about, however, and this is really a miracle, and it's one that we should be very attentive to, is that despite the rising temperature and costs of this conflict, the Abraham Accords, which established a certain degree of peace between Israel and a number of states who were previously in a state of enmity, that accord has held. And that's the best news on the geopolitical front that I can think of in the last 50 years. There is some real possibility still that Israel and its neighbors could enter into a long-standing and productive peace. And God, we could all pray for that, because that would be the best possible outcome for everyone involved. I'm certain that Iran does not believe that pathway is in their interest. And so they're going to do everything they can, not only to foster this war, which is what they have been doing, but also to fund and foment all the protests that have been racking the Western world in support, hypothetical support of Hamas.
Let's end on a more positive note, Jordan. I could talk to you all day. In fact, one day I want to do that. It would be fascinating. You've got an extraordinary mind, and you have such an extraordinary take on all these things. But let's talk about you and what your plans are for 2024. I know you've got a tour, you have your academy, and you have a new book.
Yes, I'm finishing up what I think will be 2 books. The first one is called We Who Wrestle with God, and it's going to be an analysis of the fundamental stories of the Western world. And so that really means a biblical analysis I did a series of lectures in 2017 on Genesis, which were very well received, including by atheists, and then also a seminar last year on Exodus. And in this book, I've walked through a good sampling of the major biblical stories, attempting to explain, insofar as I'm capable, what they mean. One book is going to focus on the Old Testament and the other on the New Testament. And I'm finishing those up now. That'll constitute the content for the tour that my wife and I are going on with some special guests, including Jonathan Pageau, that will run from February through May, 51 cities across the United States, and then off to Central and South America. And I'm very much excited about doing that and
So he's basically like a rock star.
Recording it and releasing those recordings live. The reason this is so important, Piers, is because our world depends on stories. The integrity of our psyches is predicated on the unity and functionality of the stories that guide our perceptions and our emotions and our social...
You know, a cynic would say, create the problem, then sell the solution to the problem in an overly intellectualized way. The cynic would say that. I wonder if that's Jordan's real intention, or if his real intention is money. The jury's still out. Okay, let's end the video there. Hit the like, hit the sub, hit all for notifications, drop me a donation like Hunter M, Adrian R, Tom M, Bobby, Dylan, Renaissance Press, Brian, Andrew, and Alan. Shoutouts to you, most recent purchaser of Strategist Guide to Seduction. Thank you. My books can be bought at bit.ly/heliosbooks. If you want to watch my videos 3 or 4 at a time, go to my Patreon. It's patreon.com/theheliosblog. I offer early access there. Want me to help you out? Well, I do offer coaching services. Just message me at theheliosblog@gmail.com. That's my email, and I'll sort you right in. Thank you so much for listening, guys, especially if you listen to the end. I really do appreciate it. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.